My name is Victoria Mercer Bennett. I'm 38 years old, and the night my family handed my 11-year-old son a cold hot dog while their children ate $120 steaks, I finally stopped protecting the people who had spent years humiliating us. "We didn't order for your son," my brother said, pushing a paper tray across the white tablecloth like he was feeding a stray animal outside a gas station. Beside him, his two kids dug into filet mignon and picked desserts off a silver cart. My mother barely looked up. "You should have packed him something," she added. My son stared at the hot dog, then quietly folded his award certificate beneath his chair so no one would spill sauce on it. That certificate was the reason we were there. He had just won the Young Infrastructure Innovator Award for designing a low-cost flood warning device, yet my family had turned his celebration into another ceremony honoring themselves. I smiled at my brother and said, "Noted." He mistook my calm for surrender. What he didn't know was that I had spent the last 4 months auditing the construction company he believed would soon belong entirely to him. He also didn't know what was inside the blue folder beneath my chair, or why the foundation's board members had been invited into our private dining room. When the waiter asked whether he should clear the unused place sitting beside me, I stood, lifted my glass, and announced that before dessert was served. Everyone needed to hear why my brother would no longer be running our family company by morning. The room went silent. "Before I tell you what happened next, tell me, what time is it where you are and where are you watching from? I'd love to know how far this story travels." The dinner was held inside the Hawthorne Rail Museum, a century-old station recently converted into one of the most exclusive event venues in western Pennsylvania. Mercer Civic Development, the construction company my father founded, had restored it. My brother, Grant Mercer, treated the project like his personal monument. His photo was in the brochure, his name was on the donor wall, and that night he moved between tables accepting praise for saving a piece of American history. What the guests didn't know was that I'd found structural discrepancies, altered invoices, and payments routed through subcontractors that existed only on paper. I worked as a forensic construction auditor. Companies hired me after a project had already gone wrong, to figure out whether the failure was incompetence, fraud, or both. My father had asked me to quietly review the museum project after the insurance carrier questioned several cost increases. Grant believed I was just helping organize documents before the board meeting. He had no idea my report was already over 200 pages. Liam's award ceremony had taken place in the museum auditorium that afternoon. His device used cheap soil sensors and recycled phone components to warn rural communities when drainage channels were nearing dangerous levels. He'd built it after our neighborhood flooded 2 summers earlier, after he sat beside an elderly neighbor, terrified her basement would fill before her oxygen equipment could be moved. For 8 months, he tested sensors in buckets and muddy drainage ditches until the system worked. The Regional Engineering Foundation chose him out of more than 600 students. Grant's kids had entered the same competition with a professionally assembled toy bridge. They got participation medals. Grant smiled for the photos, but I saw his jaw tighten when Liam's name was called as the overall winner. At dinner, Grant had arranged a printed 4-course menu. His kids ordered filet mignon. My parents ordered sea bass. His wife Mallory chose lamb and spent 10 minutes on the wine pairing. Liam waited for someone to take his order. When the waiter reached him, Grant raised a hand. "He's not on the package." I assumed it was a mix-up and asked the waiter to add a meal. Grant leaned back and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "We didn't order for your son." Then a hot dog wrapped in paper arrived. My mother told me I should have packed Liam food, since kids are picky. My father just stared at his plate. He'd seen Grant belittle me before, and silence had become his way of avoiding responsibility. Liam whispered that he wasn't hungry. I knew that voice. It was the one he used when he wanted to make himself smaller so the adults would stop fighting. I asked Grant why every other child had been included in the package. He shrugged. because their parents confirmed the proper reservation. I pulled out my phone and showed him the email confirming 2 seats and Liam's meal, sent 3 weeks earlier. He glanced at it and said the venue must have lost it. The waiter's expression changed. He looked like he wanted to say something, but Grant dismissed him with a flick of his fingers. That tiny gesture told me everything. Grant had changed the seating instructions himself. He wanted Liam to understand that winning an award didn't grant him equal status in this family. And he wanted to remind me that he still decided who belonged. I looked at the blue folder under my chair. Until that moment, I'd planned to hand my father the report privately, give Grant a chance to resign quietly. Then Liam asked if he could eat his hot dog in the hallway so he wouldn't embarrass anyone. Something inside me went still. "No," I told him. "You're staying right here." I set the paper tray in the center of the table, looked at Grant, and said, "Noted." He smiled, thinking he'd won. I asked the waiter to leave the unused place, setting exactly where it was. Grant laughed and told me not to make a tragedy out of processed meat. A few relatives smiled nervously. They'd spent years treating his cruelty like clever humor, because challenging him took more courage than laughing along. I stood and tapped my spoon against my glass. The sound carried farther than I expected. My father asked what I was doing. "Correcting the guest list," I said. Grant told me to sit down. I looked toward the doorway, where 3 members of the Mercer Civic Development Board had just walked in with Naomi Clark, the company's outside compliance attorney, carrying a locked document case. I'd asked them to arrive at 8. I hadn't told my family why. Grant's smile disappeared. I introduced Liam as the Foundation's award winner and asked the room to applaud him before we discussed anything else. The applause started uncertainly, then grew as Foundation representatives stood. Grant interrupted before it ended. "This is a private family dinner," Naomi answered from the doorway. "It stopped being private when company funds paid for it." I opened the folder and held up the event invoice. Mercer Civic Development had been billed $18,400 for the dinner, including meals for 2 children who weren't there, a champagne reception that never happened, and an executive suite listed under Grant's name. Yet Liam's confirmed meal had been manually removed from the seating plan. The banquet manager confirmed Grant had emailed the revision that morning, instructing her to charge Liam's meal to the corporate account while serving him the cheapest item on the menu. "This is ridiculous," Grant snapped. "It was a harmless joke." "A joke creates laughter," I said. This created an invoice discrepancy. Then I told them the audit had uncovered far more than a dinner charge. Over 18 months, Grant had approved nearly $900,000 in payments to 3 subcontractors connected to a former college roommate. 2 had no employees, no equipment, no active licenses. The 3rd billed the museum for waterproofing that lab tests showed had never been installed. Grant shoved his chair back so hard it hit the wall. He accused me of stealing confidential documents. Naomi explained the board had authorized my access, and independent counsel already had copies. My father's face went gray. He asked if the missing waterproofing was a safety risk. I told him the building wasn't in immediate danger, but the lower archive could flood in a severe storm repair estimate, at least $400,000. I laid 3 photographs on the table, each showing the same empty storefront listed as the registered address for all 3 shell firms. Then a payment timeline showing transfers made within 48 hours of Grant buying a lake house through an LLC. My mother whispered his name. Mallory stared at him like she'd never seen him before. "You're destroying this family because your kid didn't get steak," Grant said. I looked at Liam's untouched hot dog. "No. The hot dog only showed me you still think taking from someone counts as winning." I announced I was withdrawing my professional certification from every report Grant had submitted under my name. Years earlier, he'd talked me into signing a limited technical review agreement, claiming it was for internal use only. My audit showed he'd copied my signature onto at least 7 public financing applications. The board chair stepped forward and suspended Grant's executive authority on the spot. His building access, financial permissions, and devices would be disabled before he left the museum. Grant did what he always did when cornered. He rewrote history. He told the board I'd resented him since childhood, that this was revenge for being overlooked. He reminded everyone I'd left the company 12 years earlier after what he called an emotional breakdown. I felt Liam's fingers tighten around mine. For a moment, I was 26 again, standing in a temporary site office. I'd developed a method for catching concrete curing defects before visible cracking, the kind of thing that saves contractors millions. I gave it to Grant, then director of field operations, so he could format it for Dad. 2 weeks later, he presented it to a state transportation panel under his own name. When I confronted him, he produced an email that looked like me abandoning the project and admitting my numbers were unreliable. My father pulled me off the technical team. Grant got promoted. I resigned 3 months later. It cost me more than my career. My fiancé, Daniel, worked in the company's legal department. Grant privately showed him messages suggesting I'd fabricated test results and planned to blame Daniel if regulators came calling. Daniel ended our engagement without telling me why. I spent years thinking he'd simply stopped loving me. 6 months before this dinner, Daniel found those old files during a server migration and contacted me. The messages weren't mine. Their metadata showed they'd been created on Grant's computer, then forwarded through an admin account to look authentic. He apologized, but apologies don't return 12 years. At the table, Naomi opened the locked case and produced a forensic report from an independent cybersecurity firm. Grant laughed too loudly, said nobody cared about old family arguments. My younger brother Ethan, a field engineer who'd stayed quiet all night, stood up. I care. He admitted Grant had used the same playbook on him 3 years earlier. After Ethan questioned a drainage calculation, an anonymous complaint accused him of drinking on the job. Disproven, but he still lost his role as project lead. Grant took over the contract. Ethan had never connected it to my departure, because Grant kept us isolated, feeding each of us a different story about why the others couldn't be trusted. The forensic report linked Grant's old login credentials directly to the forged messages used against me, and to recently altered inspection records on the museum project. Grant told our father the forensic firm was biased because I'd hired it. My father asked, point blank, whether Grant was denying he'd presented my concrete analysis as his own. We were working for the same company, Grant said. Nothing belongs to one person in a family business. That sentence did more damage than any document. My mother asked if he'd lied to Daniel too. Grant rolled his eyes. She was going to outgrow him anyway. My mother stood, pressed both hands on the table, and looked at the son she'd defended through every accusation. You let your sister believe she was unlovable for 12 years. Grant said everyone was being dramatic. My mother unpinned the gold company pin she'd worn since my father founded the business and set it beside his plate. We were negligent, she said. You were deliberate. Grant spun toward me, shouting that I'd manipulated everyone because I couldn't stand his success. Liam stood up before I could answer. My mom didn't take your success. She found out where you took it from, Grant laughed. No one joined him this time. My father asked the children to leave. Grant agreed immediately, assuming the adults could now negotiate in private. I refused to let Liam be sent out like he was the source of the shame. Instead, a foundation coordinator took the kids to the museum's simulator gallery so Liam could demo his prototype. Before he left, I told him none of this was his fault. Once the doors closed, my father finally asked the question he'd avoided for years. How much? Naomi answered. $876,000 in confirmed questionable payments, another $1.4 million unaccounted for luxury travel, private school donations made in his kids' names. Furniture for the lake house, even this dinner. Mallory covered her mouth. Grant had told her the lake house came from a performance bonus. The board chair confirmed no such bonus existed. Grant turned on his wife for humiliating him in public. That's when Mallory's shock turned to anger. She asked if their kids' education accounts were even real. He wouldn't answer. She walked out and called her attorney. My father still hesitated, the old instinct to protect his heir. He asked if the investigation could stay internal. Naomi explained that public redevelopment grants had funded part of the museum. If invoices were falsified, the board had a legal duty to report it. My father looked at me like I'd invented the law just to trap his son. "Did you have to do this tonight?" he asked. "They're the same issue," I told him. Grant decides rules don't apply to people he considers beneath him. He removed Liam's dinner because he could. He erased my name from my own work because he could. He pulled safety material off a public project because he believed no one would ever challenge him. Ethan said every employee on site already knew it. People stopped reporting problems because they were afraid of what happened to whoever spoke up. My father sat there with his eyes closed, finally hearing what his decisive leadership had actually built. Grant called Ethan jealous and me vindictive, said our father owed him loyalty for sacrificing his whole life to the business. "Loyalty isn't immunity," I said. Then I asked my parents the question I'd never dared ask out loud. How many people were you willing to let him hurt, so you could keep believing you raised a perfect son? My mother started crying. Grant sensed the room softening and switched tactics, told her the pressure of preserving Dad's legacy had broken him. Promised to repay whatever had been miscategorized, even offered to apologize to Liam. My mother almost believed him. Then Naomi placed one more document on the table, an email Grant had sent 2 days earlier, after learning the board planned to review costs, instructing the finance director to delete archived vendor correspondence, and suggesting they pin the missing waterproofing on Ethan. My mother read it twice. Grant said it was taken out of context. Ethan asked what context justifies framing your own brother for fraud. There was no answer. My father took off the company's signet ring he'd worn for 34 years and set it down. "You're suspended." Grant said the board couldn't touch him. He controlled the largest voting block after our father. I opened the last section of the folder. Years earlier, my father had given all 3 of us equal non-voting shares, but kept voting control inside a family trust. Grant always assumed those votes would pass to him on Dad's retirement. What he didn't know was that 6 months earlier, after the insurance inquiry started, my father had quietly named me independent trustee because my license required me to stay outside company management. I had the authority to freeze any voting transfer the moment credible fraud threatened the trust's assets. That afternoon, before the award ceremony, I'd already exercised it. Grant didn't control the company. He never had. He'd only ever controlled our fear of confronting him. Security walked him out without his phone, laptop, or badge after he tried to slip into the admin office for files. The dinner ended early. No one touched dessert. I took Liam to a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. He ordered pancakes, eggs, and the biggest chocolate milkshake on the menu and asked if his uncle was going to jail. I told him I didn't know, that consequences were for investigators to decide, not our anger. I also told him that speaking up isn't the same as wanting someone destroyed. We'd presented facts. What happened next was Grant's choice. Those choices got harder to deny over the following weeks. A national accounting firm expanded my audit and confirmed the 3 shell subcontractors had routed payments back to an investment company tied to Grant. The waterproofing hadn't been an oversight. He'd approved a cheaper substitute, billed the original price, and pocketed the difference. The museum's lower archive closed for repairs. When the story went public, Grant gave an interview calling himself the victim of a family coup. It fell apart fast. Records showed my audit had started months before the dinner. And former employees started coming forward with their own stories of altered inspections and retaliation. The board terminated him for cause, costing him his unvested equity and severance. The court froze the lake house. He eventually sold it and put the proceeds in escrow. Mallory filed for separation after learning he'd borrowed against their personal accounts without telling her. I felt no satisfaction watching their marriage end. Their kids hadn't done anything wrong, and I made sure Liam never treated his cousins as extensions of their father's behavior. Revenge against innocent people just recreates the same cruelty. My mother called repeatedly, asking me to convince the board to bring Grant back in some reduced role. Surely losing his title, house, and marriage was punishment enough. I reminded her the company employed 200 people and built public infrastructure. It wasn't a family allowance. My father invited me to lunch and suggested that cooperating fully with investigators might permanently damage the Mercer name. I asked if he wanted to preserve the name or make it worth preserving. He didn't answer. Ethan became interim director, but turned down the CEO job, telling the board the company needed outside leadership with no family ties. They hired an executive who built an anonymous reporting system, separated project approval from payment authorization, and brought back employees who'd been punished for raising concerns, some with formal apologies and compensation. My father stepped down as chairman, and his retirement statement didn't excuse Grant or call it a misunderstanding. It admitted leadership had let misconduct continue. That sentence cost him more than losing the title ever did. Grant contacted me twice. The first message called me a traitor. The second, after the court ordered restitution, said, "You got what you wanted." I waited, then sent one line back. "What I wanted was for you to stop. And you refused every chance you were given." He never apologized to Liam directly, just offered, through our mother, to buy him an expensive computer. I declined. A gift meant to skip accountability isn't an apology. 6 months later, Grant pleaded guilty to falsifying business records and misusing company funds. Home confinement, probation, restitution, and a ban from serving as an officer of any company receiving public development funds. He'd spent his whole life building an identity as the family's untouchable golden son. In the end, the heaviest consequence wasn't the title or the lake house. It was finally being seen accurately. Almost a year after that dinner, Liam and I went back to the Hawthorne Rail Museum for the opening of a youth engineering lab. His flood warning design had been expanded with university students and emergency management specialists. And 3 rural communities were already testing updated versions near drainage channels that used to overflow every storm. His name was on a small plaque beside the first prototype. He read it once, smiled, and went right back to showing another kid how the sensor worked. He didn't ask if Grant would ever see it. He didn't need approval from someone who tried to make him feel undeserving. My parents came to the opening, but our relationship wasn't built on pretending anymore. I'd set boundaries before letting them back into Liam's life. They couldn't use him to carry messages to Grant, couldn't pressure him to forgive an apology he'd never gotten. Couldn't laugh off cruelty as a joke again. My mother accepted that first. My father resisted, then slowly understood boundaries weren't punishment, they were what made trust possible again. He apologized to me without a single excuse attached. "I kept asking the injured person to be quieter," he said, "because confronting the person causing the injury would have meant admitting I'd failed." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. I didn't promise instant forgiveness. Real forgiveness isn't amnesia, and reconciliation isn't an obligation. We could build something new. We couldn't go back to what existed before, because what existed before was never safe. My mother started seeing a family therapist on her own, working through how praising Grant had become tangled up with her own sense of having raised a good child. Ethan and I rebuilt what Grant had spent years quietly poisoning, comparing notes, realizing how many small lies had kept us apart. Isolation had been one of his most effective tools, because people who never compare stories are easy to control. Mercer Civic Development survived, but it's a different company now. It repaid the public funds, finished the museum repairs, and published an outside compliance report. Family members can apply for jobs there, but only through the same process as anyone else. I turned down a permanent board seat. For most of my life, I thought reclaiming my place in that company would prove Grant hadn't beaten me. I eventually realized I didn't need his old throne. I built a respected career precisely because I'd left, and started a small internship program for young people interested in ethical engineering and public accountability. Daniel and I met twice after his apology. We forgave each other as much as we could, but we didn't restart anything. Some doors close because of deception, and learning the truth doesn't always give you back what time already took. That was painful and also freeing. I stopped needing every loss reversed before I could move forward. Grant stayed distant from the rest of the family. As part of his probation, he eventually sent Liam a handwritten letter, not asking for forgiveness, just admitting that excluding him from that dinner had been deliberate, meant to diminish what he'd achieved. Liam read it, put it in a drawer, and said he wasn't ready to respond. I told him he never had to be. Kids shouldn't be trained to drop their boundaries just because an adult finally admits what they did. After the lab opening, we ate at the museum cafe, burgers, soup, grilled cheese, slices of pie. Liam ordered a hot dog. I asked if the choice bothered him. He grinned. "It's food, Mom. Uncle Grant was the problem." He ate every bite, then ordered apple pie. That answer stopped me cold. For months, I'd carried that hot dog around like a symbol of humiliation. Liam simply refused to let Grant own it. Breaking a toxic family cycle isn't about winning the loudest argument in the room. It's about refusing to pass the injury forward, protecting children without teaching them hatred, demanding accountability without becoming cruel. Understanding that silence can do as much damage as the abuse it covers for. Family loyalty should never require someone to swallow humiliation. Peace that depends on one person absorbing all the pain isn't peace. It's obedience. I used to think strength meant enduring everything without complaint. Now I know strength can sound like one calm word, noted, spoken the exact moment you decide the pattern ends with you. My announcement that night didn't destroy our family. It exposed what had already been destroying us. The truth cost us titles, money, relationships, illusions, but it gave Liam something worth far more, proof that his dignity was never up for negotiation. And it gave me back the voice I'd given up years before, so here's the question I still sit with. When protecting the family means sacrificing the most vulnerable person at the table, what exactly are we protecting? Sometimes the bravest thing isn't forgiving fast or keeping everyone together. Sometimes it's standing up, telling the truth, and letting the consequences finally walk into the room.